Welcome back again to Last Week I Watched. I'm Mark and I watch and review movies and TV shows and try to give you some suggestions, I guess, on what's worth your time. So this week I would like to talk about Death on the Nile, The Outlaws, Dopesick, The Chalet, Godzilla vs. Kong, and Pam and Tommy. So let's talk about them. First up is Death on the Nile. It's from 2022. It stars Kenneth Branagh, Tom Bateman and Gal Gadot, and it's showing on Disney+. So while on vacation on the Nile, Hercule Poirot, played by Kenneth Branagh, must investigate the murder of a heiress aboard the steamer Karnak. As the bodies start to pile up, Hercule races to solve the murders before the murderer can disembark the boat. So this is another lush adaptation of an Agatha Christie novel. This one's from 1937. It's been adapted before into film in 1978. As the previous Branagh-Poirot adaptation, Murder on the Orient Express, it features a really great cast in fantastic period locations, behaving badly as usual. There's some complaints that the the location CG looked fake, but I actually think it looks pretty good. I didn't find anything obviously wrong with it. Nothing looked obviously fake, but I think it's perhaps a little stylized since we get very colourful sunsets and clear blue desert skies and things like that. But it certainly doesn't look terrible, and obviously they're going to have to use CG since Egypt no longer looks like it did then. Apparently there are lots of buildings now pretty close to the pyramids, so they'd have certainly looked out of place back then. But it all looks great, I think, and it fits stylistically in with the look of Murder on the Orient Express. The film adaptation has been changed from the books though. It condenses and combines some characters. It's not a big problem though. The story is still largely intact, but it has reduced the number of players in the story. And I think that's probably a good thing, because the one criticism I could probably level at it is that some of the cast don't have a lot to do or contribute to the story. They're more just sort of ciphers there to muddy the water in locating the killer. It felt more gratuitous in Orient, which felt more like everyone had something to do, but some of the side characters are more decorative, I think. It's entirely possible that the film was affected by COVID, as it was delayed a number of times, and it doubtless had some impact on the production and probably limited things like location shooting, etc. The steamer apparently was a set constructed in the studio car park, which you really wouldn't know. There are also some additional issues with Armie Hammer and his very public problems that came out during this film, and he was playing one of the major characters, so that possibly impacted the film if they were forced to reduce his input. But who can say? Overall, I enjoyed the film. I'd probably rank it behind Orient Express, but it was still a worthy addition to the series, and I still enjoyed the twists and turns trying to figure out who the killer is. It's interesting that they tried to give Poirot some backstory, even if it didn't necessarily make any sense. I really don't know how he could grow that fabulous mustache to cover his scarred and damaged face from the war, given that scar tissue would not be able to grow hair. But I did like the continuing hinting that his great mind is almost certainly on the autism spectrum with his ongoing OCD issues. It's nice to see it start to be portrayed as a useful skill, a highly focused attention to detail, and not just a disability. So if you enjoyed Orient Express, I would check it out. I eagerly await the next Christie adaptation from Branagh. I was wondering, maybe did Agatha Christie ever write a story on a plane, maybe, and then we could have a planes, trains and boats type of theme, maybe. Who knows? Let's see what the next one brings. Okay, next up was The Outlaws. It's a TV series. It's from 2021, starring Christopher Walken, Stephen Merchant, Rhiannon Barreto. It's showing on Prime. So this is about 7 strangers. They're from different walks of life, and they're forced to complete a community payback sentence in Bristol. In this season 1, there's 6 episodes. It's a quirky comedy/drama series, and yeah, it's an interesting group of people. They're quite diverse. They have different viewpoints. We have a very left leaning woman, and she butts heads up against the extremely right-wing racist, I suppose would be one way. You know, there's a young girl who's acting out, I think, in her teenage years. There's a boy that's not necessarily bad, but he's gotten into trouble trying to protect his sister. There's an elderly man who's gotten out of prison, and he's attempting to go straight. There's a man that's grossly incompetent that's gotten into trouble. So, it's kind of interesting. They're all very diverse. They've all got very interesting viewpoints. And it's interesting to see them bond and come together as a group over the course of the series. Especially once one of the characters stashes some money belonging to a local drug dealer, and it's accidentally found by the others who don't want to, who want to spend it or use it to solve their life problems, but ultimately attracts angry drug dealers who want it back, and retribution. The threat of a larger Mr. Big hangs over the events, but it looks like it's being held for season 2, which fortunately has already been greenlit, but it doesn't necessarily wrap everything up at the end of the 6 episodes. The cast is good fun. There's some outstanding characters. Stephen Merchant in particular, he's good fun as a quirky and largely useless lawyer. He's well-meaning, but he's somehow managed to fly under the radar at his firm, but his incompetence could be revealed at any time. Christopher Walken is also great fun as Frank. He was the absent parent who was recently released from prison for carrying out cons and is wrestling with trying to go straight. All of the cast have their own secrets, and these come to light over the season, and as they sort of gradually, I guess, dive into their lives and sort of reveal their backstory, and that sort of moves in tandem with the main story. I had a good time with this one. I'm looking forward to the next season, as it did end kind of abruptly with threats hanging. So hopefully Merchant has a story to tell and sufficient room to tell it. There's nothing worse than a series getting canned before it finishes its story. So check this one out. It's good fun. It's worth your time. Okay, next up was Dopesick. It's from 2021. It's starring Michael Keaton, Peter Sarsgaard, and Michael Stuhlbarg. Apologies if I mangled your name. And it's showing on Disney+. So, Dopesick takes you to the epicenter of America's struggle with opioid addiction, from the boardrooms of Purdue Pharma to a distressed mining community in Virginia to the hallways of the DEA. So, as I said, it's a mini-series. There's only 8 episodes in it. It's based on a book, Dopesick, Dealers, Doctors, and the Drug Company That Addicted America by Beth Macy. And it focuses on a small town with the individuals that are affected by OxyContin addiction, the conflicts of interest between the various government agencies like the Food and Drug Administration, who are sort of trying to do things but are kind of causing problems for each other, and finally Purdue Pharma and their development, testing, and marketing of the drug OxyContin. It's got a great cast. They do a great job with this true story. It's quite a heavy subject though. I warn you, there are some real lows in the story, and there is some deaths and things like that. But the cast handle the range well. Stuhlbarg is really disturbing as Richard Sackler, the head of Purdue. There's just something not quite right with this man. I'm assuming that his portrayal is pretty accurate to who this person is, but there's just something's not right with him. He's dead behind the eyes. He's clearly a man who has some real empathy issues, combined with some absolutely breathtaking family problems. Michael Keaton's also great as a doctor who initially prescribes the drug with some trepidation, but later becomes addicted to it after being involved in an accident. And he has to deal with the addiction as it destroys his life and ultimately transforms it into something redemptive. This is a fascinating look into the story and at how a drug that was supposed to be for alleviating pain went on to cause so much pain, suffering, and ultimately death. Ultimately just so Purdue Pharma could make as much money as possible. Purdue's trite claims of removing pain from the world were nothing but sad justifications to try to excuse the misery they inflicted. It's very similar, I think, to Big Tobacco, even when they were well aware that the drug was highly addictive and dangerous, with people developing tolerances to the opioid, rendering it ineffective. Their response was to keep increasing the size of the tablets and telling the doctors to push more of it to cover up that the drug wasn't working as they claimed. All they wanted was to sell more, even creating marketing faux medical literature to push claims that they didn't really make any sense, but gave it some authenticity from appearing to have come from the medical community. Providing perks to doctors to influence them to prescribe the drug, essentially bribes, the whole affair is quite distasteful. It's certainly an eye-opener to late-stage capitalism at all costs. Watching how it's ruined these people's lives, often prescribed for quite small issues, but going on to become a major addiction that destroyed relationships and impacted their ability to work and live their lives. It's pretty shocking, really. The addiction to opioids is painful, it's extremely difficult to get rid of, and it often ends in death, sadly. and the demonization too of patients that were branded as addicts, filthy drug users that became addicted through using the drug through perfectly legitimate means prescribed by doctors. Yeah, demonized in the media, often driven by Purdue, and that was, absolutely disgusting. As long as Purdue kept making profit, anything goes, it seemed. Disappointingly, even when Purdue were ultimately exposed, the fact that they have access to so much money and connections to so much power, they're ultimately able to weasel their way out of any real consequences, and that's disgraceful. It's a shame how laws are weakened by lobbyists, government institutions are failing to do the necessary diligence or monitoring, and the rot in the system is ultimately failing to protect people, which is their job. Remember, they work for us. Anyway, I would definitely give the show a watch. I think it's a must watch. It's a really important issue to be aware of, and remember, it's always important to question everything. Don't just take it at face value because a corporation or whatever said so. Next up is The Chalet. It's from 2017. It stars Chloe Lambert, Philippe Dussault and Manuel Blanc. It's on Netflix. So this one's about a reunion of childhood friends at a chalet in the French Alps. It soon turns into a desperate struggle for survival as they get trapped on the mountain, and a shocking dark secret from the past surfaces. So this is a mini-series. It's in French, so it will require subtitles. There are 6 episodes. It's a bit of a slow burn episodic thriller. It initially takes some time to establish the characters and get moving, but once it gets going, it's quite gripping. It does jump back and forth between 2 time periods though, which is initially a bit disorientating, since you're not really sure in which period until you get the grip on the characters, but it jumps between present day and the dark secret that haunts the small village in the past. It doesn't really indicate when it jumps back and forth, so it does. You really have to focus and keep track of it. It is a little bit confusing initially. The cast do a good job, but some of them do look too similar, and there's a few of them, so I did personally struggle with keeping track of who was who. Once they start meeting with accidents though, it does help as the cast list reduces, but it all clicks into place by the end, and once you have the full picture on what happened in the past and you sort of get used to who everyone is, it then becomes a case of trying to find the killer in the group that remains. I did manage to guess one person that was connected just because they had strange behaviour right from the get-go, but the killer was still a surprise. Once the story is revealed as a dark tale of revenge though, its ending is quite bittersweet. I did hope that people who were affected by the secret would be reunited, but I guess years of anger and resentment has fundamentally changed who they are, and they've given everything to revenge ultimately. It's interesting also that the terrible act that caused all this was simply down to jealousy and greed, but those are often very human truisms that often precede these kinds of things. Overall, I thought it was a good story. It's worth checking out. Unfortunately, it may not be on Netflix anymore, as when it was suggested to me, it came up on my list as leaving soon, so it may have gone now, but if you can track it down somewhere else and you're into thriller whodunits, then definitely check it out. Okay, next up was Godzilla vs. Kong. This was from 2021. It stars Rebecca Hall, Millie Bobby Brown, and Alexander Skarsgård, and I watched it on Netflix, but I think it's pretty much available on most streaming services. So this was the next chapter in the cinematic monsterverse, because everyone has to have a universe now because of the MCU, and this one pits Godzilla against Kong, with humanity caught in the middle. So this is the 4th Monsterverse film, the 36th Godzilla film, and the 12th Kong film. It's amazing that these characters have endured this many films now, so they're obviously popular. Okay, let's get this out of the way. We know that this is not going to be an amazing story. It's 2 giant monsters in a slogfest, and that's okay. That's fine. The effects look great, the titular characters look great, the movie doesn't seem to take itself too seriously, which is good, because it can get quite ridiculous. Giant creatures is already straining credulity, but the Hollow Earth theory is on display here, and while it does look great and it's an interesting environment or world that they visit, it is pretty ridiculous. I had a hard time realigning my credibility on that one, but it is what it is. It's just popcorn entertainment, so check out your brain and just just enjoy the spectacle, I guess. There's a bit of story in here in that Godzilla is going batshit, attacking various locations that seem to have connection to a corporation called Apex. Now Apex needs some kind of energy source that Godzilla displays, and Monarch figures out the creatures came from the Hollow Earth originally, or somebody approaches them that says that they came from there. Anyway, whatever, they band together, and with some new tech they enlist Kong to lead them into the Hollow Earth with Apex's ulterior motive of getting this energy source for their secret project. Now, Godzilla has been lashing out at Apex because he's attracted by them messing around with whatever this energy is, and ultimately it turns out that Apex has built Mecha Godzilla to kick Godzilla's leathery butt, because man has to dominate everything, of course. After Godzilla and Kong fight, and I'm not going to spoil who loses, they ultimately get their shit together and band together to take out Mechagodzilla, who is it turns out, a much bigger threat, and has a connection to a villain from a previous film. I'm glad they made some kind of attempt to come up with a story, even if it's ridiculous sometimes, but it does often feel like a Transformer movie, and that you spend more time with the humans than you do with the critters that you actually came to see. So while the bits with people are there to move this story along, they're often the least interesting bits. The actors do a great job though with what they've got, and let's be honest, it's not classic drama. They look great interacting with the environments and the creatures, and ultimately the monster smashing beatdowns are what we came for, and those are well choreographed, and surprisingly they are a fair chunk of the runtime as well, so you know, it's not like it's 10 minutes worth of Godzilla or anything. I was satisfied with them coming down together to beat down Mechagodzilla, as I didn't really have a problem with either monster, and was just kind of happy for them to hold hands and win together. To summarize though, it's big, it's dumb, it's loud, but it's an entertaining distraction from these difficult times that we're living in. So if you want to just check out your brain for a while and be entertained by a bunch of monsters brawling on screen, it's worth checking out. It's definitely still a good time. Okay, finally is Pam and Tommy. It's from 2022. It's a mini-series starring Lily James, Sebastian Stan and Seth Rogen. It's showing on Disney+. So this miniseries follows the story of Tommy Lee, played by Sebastian Stan, and Pamela Anderson, played by Lily James, and it's their relationship that started with them marrying after only knowing each other in 96 hours, and culminates in a tale of revenge and the infamous sex tape. This is 8 episodes, and the miniseries recounts the story of Tommy Lee and Pam's relationship and how that tape came around. It was surprisingly interesting, as while I'd heard of the tape, I really don't think anyone who has lived through these times hasn't heard of it. It's quite infamous. I wasn't aware of any context around how the tape got out there though, so I found it quite interesting, and while it wasn't very good for Rand Gauthier, played by Seth Rogen, to steal the tape, even if he had been wronged and maligned by Tommy Lee, it becomes increasingly clear that Pam is the victim in all this. Even when she tried to end it, Tommy Lee's stubbornness and anger kept it going along, and of course, eventually just all gets out of control, especially once the fledgling internet gets a hold of it. Interestingly, it kind of pioneered some of the online activities for adults, and Rand was using the internet as a means to distribute the tape and later as a streamable, I think when another company gets involved in it. The actors all do a great job, especially Stan and James, who are made to resemble their real life counterparts, and like the offending tape, the show is, I think, quite a voyeuristic look into the lives of these people, and I think it was based on some biographies as well, so you know, it's got some I have no reason to doubt the validity of the information. There's an infamous scene where Tommy Lee talks to his penis. That was bizarre, but I guess, you know, it's come from Tommy Lee's biography, and hey, if you talk to your penis, fair call to you, I guess. That was interesting, and yeah, it was, I guess, an interesting insight to this person. I ultimately thought Tommy Lee was kind of juvenile, and that really didn't change anything for me there. But yeah, it is an interesting treatise too on technology and the dangers of it as it becomes more prevalent. It's certainly very difficult to remove something once it's on the internet. It's effectively there forever, and watching Pam go through this, through the consequences of this, even though it was never intended to be out there, is pretty sad. And you know, people do have rights to do what they want in their private life without, you know, it being shared with the world if they didn't want that. So, But yeah, it was interesting to see their relationship, though. It felt like we were watching two essentially juvenile individuals. They've jumped into a relationship impulsively, and then, you know, going through all this, they're forced to grow up in a very public forum. Even Rand seemed to experience some shame and revulsion with what he thought originally was a blameless fuck you to Tommy Lee, but it did turn out to hurt a lot of other people. And I think he kind of accepted that at the end. So hopefully, you know, everybody that was affected, I experienced some personal growth, shall we say. Especially in Rand's case too, when he naively becomes entangled with the mafia, but I suspect that's a whole other story in itself. It does sort of lightly touch on that. He basically ends up having to go around breaking people's legs to pay them back. It's an interesting story. It's worth your time to check it out. I'm not sure that's very flattering to Tommy Lee, whose childish rock star behaviour effectively kicked all of this off. But hopefully there were some lessons learned by all involved. And for us to be mindful of what we put out there, even if it's intended to be private, I think it's certainly you know, a warning for all of us, and, you know, to be careful of maybe about unintended consequences of your actions as well. So yeah, check it out. It's a good watch. There's certainly an interesting collection of characters living through an interesting period in time. Okay, so I hope those are of interest to you. There was certainly an eclectic mix of things in there this week. As always, if you enjoyed them, please do click on the like and subscribe. It helps me to build my channel. It lets me communicate with you when the next episode is up, and you can get some more reviews for things to hopefully watch. If you have any suggestions for me to watch, or any thoughts on any of these things that you know, you want to talk about, leave them in the comments below. And also there is a link for my Twitter account. I often tweet on there with things I'm watching and what I'm watching right now, so if you want to come on there and tweet about something with me, or suggest something, feel free to tweet at me. Alright, so thanks for watching. I'll see you all next week with some more suggestions. Till then, enjoy some movies and watch some TV and chill, and stay safe out there. Thanks for watching. Bye.